What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? On December 16, 1944, in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, this question would be answered in blood, steel, and extraordinary courage. The German 1st SS Panzer Division, Hitler's most elite fighting force, launched what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, believing they could break through Allied lines and change the course of World War II. They had no idea they were about to face something they had never encountered before. American soldiers, fighting not just for victory, but for survival, backed by a general who would rather die than retreat. This is the story of how Patton's Third Army turned the tide of the largest battle ever fought by American forces, and how ordinary GIs from towns across America stood toe-to-toe with the Nazi war machine's finest and refused to break. It's a tale of leadership under impossible pressure, of split-second decisions that saved thousands of lives, and of young men who discovered that sometimes the only way out is through. The Battle of the Bulge would last 44 days, claim over 200,000 casualties, and ultimately seal Nazi Germany's fate. But on that first morning, as German panzers rolled through the morning mist and SS troops advanced with ruthless precision, nobody knew if the thin line of American defenders would hold, or if Hitler's desperate gamble might actually succeed. In the small Belgian town of Bastogne, American paratroopers would write one of the most heroic chapters in military history, while in the command centers behind the lines, generals would make decisions that would echo through generations. To understand the magnitude of what happened in the Ardennes, we need to step back to the autumn of 1944. The Allies had successfully landed at Normandy, liberated Paris, and were pressing toward Germany's borders. Hitler's Third Reich was crumbling, but the Führer had one last card to play: a massive counteroffensive that would split the Allied forces, recapture the vital port of Antwerp, and potentially force a separate peace with Britain and America. The plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, or Watch on the Rhine, was audacious to the point of desperation. Hitler would commit his last strategic reserves, 250,000 men, including 3 entire armies, to a surprise attack through the Ardennes forest, the same route Germany had used to devastating effect in 1940. Leading this assault would be the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, elite troops who had earned their reputation on the brutal Eastern Front. The German strategy relied on several critical assumptions. First, they believed the Ardennes sector was lightly defended by inexperienced American troops. Second, they counted on bad weather to ground Allied air power. Third, they expected to capture American fuel supplies to sustain their advance. Finally, they assumed that a successful breakthrough would create panic among Allied commanders and lead to hasty, uncoordinated responses. But there was one critical miscalculation in Hitler's plan. The German High Command assumed they would face the same type of resistance they had encountered in their 1940 victory: demoralized defenders who would break under pressure. They had no comprehension of what American forces had become by late 1944. These weren't the green troops who had struggled in their first encounters with German forces in North Africa. These were battle-hardened veterans who had fought their way through Sicily, Italy, and Normandy. They had learned the hard lessons of modern warfare, and they were led by commanders who understood that sometimes the best defense is an aggressive offense. The stage was set for a collision that would determine not just the outcome of a single battle, but potentially the entire European war. The men of the 1st SS Panzer Division had been forged in the crucible of the Eastern Front, where warfare had devolved into a brutal struggle for survival. They had participated in some of the most vicious fighting of the war, from the early victories in France and the Balkans to the grinding campaigns in Russia. Under the command of officers like Joachim Peiper, they had developed a reputation for ruthless efficiency and unwavering dedication to Nazi ideology. By 1944, they were no longer the parade ground soldiers who had goose-stepped through Berlin in peacetime. They were hardened killers who had learned to fight without mercy and expect none in return. Their training emphasized absolute obedience, racial superiority, and the belief that German soldiers were inherently superior to their enemies. They had been indoctrinated to view Americans as racially inferior, weakened by democracy and racial mixing. This ideological conditioning would prove to be both a strength and a fatal weakness in the coming battle. But the American forces they would face had undergone their own transformation. The 101st Airborne Division, for instance, had been baptized by fire on D-Day. Jumping behind enemy lines in the pre-dawn darkness and fighting for days, while cut off from reinforcements. Men like Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole had learned to lead from the front, earning the Medal of Honor for his actions in Normandy. The 4th Armored Division had earned its stripes in the breakout from Normandy, learning to coordinate infantry, armor, and air support in ways that maximized American technological advantages. These units had developed a flexible, aggressive fighting doctrine that emphasized rapid movement, overwhelming firepower, and initiative at every level. Unlike their German counterparts, American soldiers were encouraged to think independently, to adapt to changing situations, and to take initiative when communications broke down. This created a fundamentally different type of fighting force, one that could absorb punishment and continue functioning even when command structures were disrupted. Most importantly, they were commanded by George S. Patton, Jr., a general who had spent his entire career preparing for exactly this type of fight. Patton understood that modern warfare wasn't just about tactics and strategy. It was about will, momentum, and the ability to make quick decisions under pressure. He had studied the German blitzkrieg methods and had developed countermeasures that would turn German strengths against them. His philosophy of hold fast by fire and movement would prove decisive in the coming battle. The Battle of the Bulge represented a fundamental clash between two different philosophies of warfare and leadership. The German approach was based on rigid hierarchy, absolute obedience, and the belief that superior will and discipline could overcome material disadvantages. SS units like the 1st Panzer Division were trained to follow orders without question, to show no mercy to enemies and to fight to the death rather than accept defeat. Their tactical doctrine emphasized concentrated force, breakthrough attacks, and the psychological impact of terror. The American approach was fundamentally different. It emphasized adaptability, initiative, and the ability of small units to operate independently when communications broke down. American soldiers were trained to think for themselves, to take advantage of opportunities, and to support each other rather than simply follow orders. This created a more resilient fighting force that could absorb casualties and continue fighting even when command structures were disrupted. These philosophical differences would prove crucial in the chaotic fighting that characterized the Battle of the Bulge. When German units found themselves cut off from their command structure, they often became paralyzed, waiting for orders that never came. When American units were isolated, they typically continued fighting, using their initiative to create new tactical situations that confused and disrupted German plans. The battle also highlighted the importance of logistics and industrial capacity in modern warfare. The German offensive was launched with barely adequate supplies, relying on captured American fuel and equipment to sustain the advance. American forces, by contrast, were backed by the full industrial might of the United States, which could replace losses in men and materiel faster than the Germans could inflict them. Another crucial factor was the role of intelligence and communication. American codebreakers had provided warnings of increased German activity, though the exact timing and location of the attack remained unclear. More importantly, American radio communications allowed for rapid coordination between units, while German communications were increasingly disrupted by Allied air attacks and partisan activities. Patton's response to the German offensive demonstrated one of the most remarkable feats of military leadership in American history. When Eisenhower called an emergency meeting of Allied commanders on December 19th, most generals were still trying to understand what was happening and develop defensive strategies. Patton shocked the room by announcing that he could turn his entire Third Army 90 degrees and attack the German flank within 72 hours. This wasn't just military bravado, it was the result of careful preparation and innovative thinking. Patton had anticipated that the Germans might launch a winter offensive and had already developed contingency plans. His staff had worked out the complex logistics of moving an entire army across difficult terrain in winter conditions. Most importantly, Patton had instilled in his subordinate commanders the importance of speed and aggression, creating an organizational culture that could execute rapid changes in direction. The execution of this plan required unprecedented coordination and flexibility. Within hours of receiving orders, American units were abandoning prepared positions and moving north through ice-covered roads in sub-zero temperatures. Supply convoys were rerouted, communication lines were re-established, and air support was redirected. The 4th Armored Division led the charge, covering over 100 miles in 48 hours while maintaining combat readiness. The famous relief of Bastogne exemplified American tactical innovation. Instead of attempting a direct assault on the surrounded town, Patton's forces attacked along multiple axes, forcing the Germans to divide their attention and resources. American units used their superior mobility and communication to coordinate attacks that appeared unrelated, but were actually part of a carefully orchestrated plan to create gaps in German defenses. Perhaps most importantly, American commanders learned to use their technological advantages effectively. Superior radio communications allowed American units to call in artillery and air support with deadly precision. American logistics kept frontline units supplied even in the worst weather conditions. American medical services ensured that wounded soldiers received treatment quickly, maintaining unit morale and effectiveness. The integration of air and ground forces proved particularly devastating to German plans. When the weather cleared on December 23rd, American fighter bombers began systematically destroying German supply lines and armor concentrations. The Luftwaffe, weakened by years of attrition, could provide little effective opposition. The Battle of the Bulge forced both sides to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of modern warfare. For the Germans, it demonstrated that technological superiority and industrial capacity had become more important than individual courage and tactical skill. The 1st SS Panzer Division discovered that their reputation for invincibility meant nothing when they faced enemies who refused to be intimidated and possessed the resources to fight back effectively. The battle also revealed the dark side of Nazi ideology. SS units committed numerous atrocities during the offensive, including the massacre of American prisoners at Malmedy. These war crimes backfired strategically as news of the atrocities spread quickly through American units, hardening resolve and eliminating any possibility of surrender. German commanders discovered that terror tactics that had worked against civilian populations were counterproductive when used against professional soldiers. The ideological indoctrination that was supposed to make SS troops superior fighters actually became a liability. Their belief in racial superiority made them underestimate their opponents, while their rigid adherence to Nazi doctrine prevented them from adapting to changing tactical situations. American soldiers fighting for democratic ideals rather than racial supremacy proved more flexible and resilient under pressure. For the Americans, the battle provided both validation and sobering lessons. It confirmed that American fighting methods and leadership philosophy were superior to German approaches, but it also demonstrated the terrible cost of victory in modern warfare. The 44-day battle resulted in over 80,000 American casualties, making it one of the bloodiest engagements in American military history. The battle also highlighted the importance of alliance relationships. British forces under Field Marshal Montgomery played a crucial role in containing the northern shoulder of the German advance, while French resistance fighters provided vital intelligence about German movements. The victory at the Bulge was as much a triumph of international cooperation as it was of American military prowess. By January 25, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. The German offensive that was supposed to change the course of the war had instead accelerated Germany's defeat. The 1st SS Panzer Division, once considered the elite of the German military, had been shattered beyond repair. Hitler's last strategic reserves were gone, sacrificed in a desperate gamble that failed catastrophically. The statistics tell only part of the story. Germany lost over 120,000 men, 600 tanks and assault guns, and 1,600 aircraft. More importantly, they lost their last offensive capability. The road to Berlin was now open, and nothing could prevent the final Allied assault on the German homeland. But the real victory belonged to the ordinary American soldiers who had stood their ground in the frozen forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. These young men, farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college students from California, had faced Hitler's finest troops and refused to break. In places like Bastogne, where Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responded to German surrender demands with a simple "nuts," they had shown that American determination could match any enemy's fanaticism. They had learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do your duty despite being afraid. Sergeant Alvin York of World War I fame once said that courage was being scared to death but saddling up anyway. The GIs of the Bulge proved this maxim thousands of times over, in foxholes and aid stations, in tank battles and artillery duels. The battle proved that democracy could produce soldiers just as dedicated and effective as any totalitarian regime. American GIs fought not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in something worth defending. They supported each other not out of blind obedience, but out of genuine care for their comrades. They showed initiative not because they were programmed to, but because they understood that freedom requires individuals willing to take responsibility for their actions. Patton himself summed up the American spirit perfectly when he said, "I don't want to get any messages saying that we are holding our position. We are not holding anything. We are advancing constantly." This offensive mindset, even in defense, exemplified the American approach to warfare and life itself. When the survivors of the 1st SS Panzer Division finally surrendered in May 1945, they discovered something that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. Their American captors treated them with dignity and according to the rules of war. These young Americans, who had every reason to seek revenge for the atrocities committed at Malmedy and elsewhere, chose instead to demonstrate the values they had been fighting to preserve. The Battle of the Bulge wasn't just a military victory, it was proof that ordinary people, given the right leadership and fighting for the right cause, could overcome any challenge. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, American soldiers had faced their ultimate test and emerged victorious not through superior numbers or equipment, but through superior character, training, and leadership. The day the 1st SS faced Patton's men, they didn't just realize they weren't getting out alive, they realized they had been fighting for the wrong side all along. The heroes of the homeland had prevailed, and with their victory, they had secured not just military triumph, but moral vindication of the American way of life. That legacy lives on today, reminding us that when freedom is threatened, ordinary Americans can rise to extraordinary heights.